So hello and welcome everybody to this very special opportunity. My name is Roman Horbyk and I am a senior lecturer at Örebro University in Sweden. And I'm going to moderate today's conversation, and what a fascinating conversation it is going to be. Because today we have a very special speaker, Liubov Tsybulska, who is one of the key persons behind Ukraine's very successful information campaign since the Russian invasion on the 24th of February. But not only, because of course that success rests upon the groundwork that had been done well before the invasion, since the very start of this war back in 2014. And Liubov Tsybulska was among those a few people who bravely intervened in those early stages of the war, when Ukraine really lacked capacities and expertise, and basically took charge of things. So Liubov Tsybulska is founder and the first director of the Center for Strategic Communications that Ukrainian government founded since 2014, and also a consultant for the Ukrainian Armed Forces on strategic communications, a person who did a lot for such initiatives as the Ukraine Crisis Media Center and many other initiatives, and particularly has contributed to the Ukrainian successes, we can hope to say so, since the 24th of February. So Liubov, please, the floor is yours, and we are very much looking forward to hearing from you and learning from you and from the Ukrainian experience.
Thank you so much, Roman. Thank you for such introduction. I'm very honored to speak to you, the audience, and I am very grateful for the support our country gets from Sweden. We feel it and we appreciate it. And I think that why Ukrainians and Ukraine is so successful in strategic communications is not because of communicators mostly, but because of Ukrainian army who gives us so much of so much content. So we just have to convey it and post it all the time. So I will just give you a very brief background of who I am and what I've been doing. So many years ago I used to be a journalist, and then when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, I was invited to the Ukraine Crisis Media Center as a strategic communication advisor to the Chief of General Staff of Ukrainian Armed Forces. And it was very interesting experience because at that moment, our government realized that information attacks are very like we couldn't cope, and our government realized that this capacity our state institutions had at that moment, it was not enough to counter information attacks. So they basically started inviting civil society organizations and civil society people as advisors. And that's how I was basically deployed to the armed forces. And at that moment, there were many things happening at the same time, and we didn't understand what was going on. And we were not obviously ready for the scale of information attacks. And only the first thing we did when we started working for the army back in 2015, it was the analysis of information space on army leadership. So our goal was to measure negative coverage of army leadership within the Ukrainian information space. And we were shocked because it turned out that the negative coverage was 62% among general coverage. So you can imagine how demoralizing it was for the whole society and specifically for Ukrainian soldiers. So what Russians were trying to do at that moment, they were trying to divide the whole country, the whole society from army leadership and the government. So, and after working for the armed forces for a few years, I joined the office of Vice Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration. And I led her press office for a couple of years. And then I launched my so-called think tank in the house under the Ukraine Crisis Media Center. It was called Hybrid Warfare Analytical Group, and we did a lot of researches on Russian disinformation. One of them was Image of Europe in Russian media, where we literally calculated all negative mentions of European countries on Russian state-financed and state-controlled and orchestrated media. And that research was like a big, I would even say, scandal in some countries, especially in Estonia. And because many countries were not ready that they are actually not friends to Russia. They assumed that they were in a good relationship with Russia, but at the same time, the Kremlin was portraying them as pretty hostile states to Russian domestic audience. So, and then last year I was invited to lead and to establish the Stratcom Center. The full name is the Center for Strategic Communication and Information Security. And one of the first steps we took was the basically creation of brochure, survival brochure. So instruction, what to do in case of war or emergency. And the Swedish example was very relevant for us. And basically we did this whole brochure in accordance with the Swedish experience and the Swedish brochure. And then when the full-scale invasion started, I started getting so many different requests from different people with one question, like, what should I do? How can I help? I have a phone and computer, I can work, I can do something. So, and my colleagues and I, we launched a few networks of so-called information warriors, or just information volunteers, and they started working for different audiences: international audience, Ukrainian audience, and Russians. So when it comes to international one, we were basically shaping narratives and communicating to international opinion leaders, politicians, media, and so on. And regarding the Ukrainian one, it was a need to, raise the spirit, to lift people's spirit, and to encourage them to fight. And when we realized that we also have to target the Russians, then it turned to be like campaigns on Russian social media. First, we were very naive back in February. We thought that if we show Russians the truth, if we show what their forces were actually doing in Ukraine, that maybe they would change their mind. But turned out that it was not true, that they didn't want. They actually knew what their forces were doing. It was not a surprise for them. They were proud of this. And all these interventions Ukrainians made into Russian information space only united Russian audience, and unfortunately. So we realized that we have to act in a more sophisticated way and to have very, specific campaigns in Russian regions. Unfortunately, I cannot speak a lot about these campaigns because it's still ongoing, and we cannot reveal it because we still expect them to react to these campaigns. But I just want to reassure you that we also work as a country, and also my team, and I know that many other teams in Ukraine, they work into Russia and conduct different psyops targeting Russian audience. So I would also like to speak a little bit about Ukraine's strategic communications and where we succeeded, where we failed, and then I think that Q&A would be much more dynamic, and I would like to answer all your questions. So first of all, it's very important to understand that Russia works very skillfully in the information domain, and Russia targets different audiences in different ways with different narratives through different tools. So we see obviously that Russia targets international audience, but it's very diverse, and we cannot just say international. When we talk about the EU or even Sweden, it's another one narrative. When we speak about global south, it's totally different narratives. Also, Russia targets Ukrainian audience, trying to polarize us, trying to demoralize us, to spread fatigue, and to reduce support of Ukrainian armed forces. And of course, Russia works, and this is, I would say, the most successful strategic communications Russia conducts on Russian domestic audience, because they've been doing it for many, many years. And Russian information space is very special. Unfortunately, all the main media in Russia are, as I said, financed and orchestrated by the state, by the Kremlin. And the most disappointing thing is that these media are the most trusted. They are the most popular and the most trusted in Russia. So when it comes to international societies, what Russia is doing is analyzing vulnerabilities. So you have to know vulnerabilities of your enemy. And believe me, according to all Russian strategic documents, the West is considered as enemy. First of all, the United States, and we see when we had research on the United States image of the US in Russian media, it was clear for us that it's not Ukraine who's the main enemy for Russia. It was the US, and the Ukraine was portrayed as a puppet mostly. But the main idea is to learn vulnerabilities of these countries and exploit them. Exploit in a way that these societies start to think about their own problems, and they start fight with each other. So we saw, like, the best example would be the American elections, I would say, but also Brexit, but also French elections, and even referendum in Catalonia. We analyzed the Russian disinformation on that referendum, and it turned out that the interference was significant. So and now currently we see that the main narrative is that Ukraine is not worth of your support. Ukraine is going to fight with Russia forever, so there is no point, there is no need to support Ukraine. So basically to separate, and this is the whole idea, to separate states, neighbors, allies, neighbors, to separate groups within one society. In Ukraine, they put a lot of efforts to separate our opposition during Yanukovych rule before 2014 to make it weaker. And if you read or if you analyze Russian, especially Russian military playbooks on hybrid warfare, they all say that the first thing you have to do is to break the unity of your enemy. And that's what they did in Russia, especially to Russian opposition. So there was one leader of Russian opposition, Navalny, and then a few years ago, there was another one. They basically pushed another one, Ksenia Sobchak, and that's how Russian opposition was basically broken. And in Ukraine, as I said, they are trying to separate our government and our armed forces from the rest of the society, spreading the narrative that the government is only winning from the war, they earn money, that they are selling weapons, and a lot of basically discrediting our government and our leadership. I would say that back in 2014, all these techniques, they were pretty much effective because we were not ready. And we, at that moment, we just didn't know how they were operating. We didn't understand what was going on, as I said. But then we witnessed, especially when I worked with my colleagues for Ukrainian Armed Forces, we witnessed how they were targeting different groups like Ukrainian soldiers and separately their families, the rest of societies, politicians. For instance, our soldiers were getting, and they're still getting these messages on their cell phones. They were getting just SMS saying that your enemy is not in Russia, your enemy is in Kyiv. So turn your weapon against those who send you to the battlefield. So, and I know that, yeah, it sounds pretty, obvious that it's psychological operation, it's like something very old school, but I got feedback from many soldiers, and they say that when you are in combat, when you're in battlefield, when you actually fight and you see death around you and you are tired and you do not sleep and do not eat well, then these messages, they actually work. Because you are so exhausted that you want to put blame on someone, and this is the most easier thing, to put blame on your leadership who actually deployed you there in to these conditions. So now we see that everybody is saying that Ukraine is very successful in strategic communications. Like I keep hearing it from all my colleagues across the world, but I wouldn't give the credit only to our government. I would say that this we achieved this effect because we have very strong civil society, and especially since 2014, when Russia actually attacked us. Since 2014, we are not asleep, we are awake. We learn and we study, we analyze what Russia is doing to us. And this is the largest difference, because it's much easier to influence you if you do not pay attention. And I remember I read some military magazine, and it was said that this current conflict is the 5th generation of warfare, which means that the information domain plays the major role, obviously, but also this military or kinetic actions, they take place only when your enemy is already ready to basically accept your dominance. So this is a very important thing, that when your victim is asleep, then the most active information operations are happening, and that's what is happening to other countries as well, especially in the Western Europe, because they didn't pay attention to what Russia was doing in economic field, in information field, and diplomacy, and in other dimensions. They didn't understand that they were actually under attack all this time. And in Ukraine, we were not asleep. We knew that Russia is, was our enemy, and we were preparing all these years. So this is why a lot of people in Ukraine, when the full invasion started, they were basically ready, and their response was so quick. And another thing which makes our strategic communication so effective is that, as I said, the society is very united. Like, we understand where the threat is coming from, and we don't have time and desire to fight with each other right now. But the most important thing, I would say, that our government and our all state institutions, they trust to civil society, and they trust people on the ground, and they are ready to share information, exchange information, and they're ready to take content. And this was very, surprising for me when I realized that our SBU, or, like our military, they actually happily taking content from some productions, some individuals. And that's how we work right now. My NGO and my team, we produce content for our security agencies. First of all, the Ministry of Defense, and I encourage you to follow the Twitter account of our Minister of Defense, and you will see a lot of very interesting and cool and very unexpected communications there. So Ukraine, like, another reason why our communications are perceived that well, especially in the West, is that Ukraine gives the world very beautiful story. Like, Ukraine is a typical underdog. It's a character which is obviously weaker, smaller, but at the end it's winning. And this is very, it's like fairy tale. There is good and evil, and the good is very small and obviously weaker, but everybody's cheering for this character, because we know that this is like, we identify ourselves with this character. And Ukraine gives a beautiful story where there's a tragedy, obviously, and a lot of pain, but also a lot of humor and love and sacrifice. And here we fight Russian soldiers on the battlefield. And here we are, rescuing dogs and cats. And here we see weddings on the battlefield between women and men who serve in our army currently. So there are so many dimensions. And I would say that this is why we are so successful, because it's very humane. And we cannot see something like this coming from Russia. There's no humor, there's obviously no love. It's just cruelty, what they perform on the battlefield. This is basically the same in their communications. It's inhumanity and cruelty. And when people ask me what was the most surprising thing for me about this war, I always think that I have never imagined that they could be so cruel, that Russians, who are actually, like, we've been living with them next door, for centuries, and we know their language. A lot of people in Ukraine speak their language. We have the same religion, and they're managing to be so cruel, and they manage to, they kill and torture and rape, and you do not expect it from the people you assumed you actually know. And also we were raised on the same books, movies, not just in the Soviet Union, but after the collapse of Soviet Union. This culture sphere was basically the same. So this was very surprising to me and to many people, although say that I was very much prepared for this war, and like from my childhood, I know who was our enemy, because like I have a lot of stories, my family stories, and they all are about cruel Russians who would come and kill and deprive of food, deprive Ukrainians of food. So it was not something very revealing for me, but the level of cruelty was definitely shocking for all of us, and obviously the whole world. Let me know how much time do we have? We have 30 minutes, right?
Yeah, but if you'd like to add something, so I think we still have some minutes. Yeah.
Okay, then let me show you a couple of videos which we produce. So as I said, we do a lot of stuff. We create content for our institutions. We help our military. And that's what I call like, classic strategic communications, when you basically white communications, when you can do it in white gloves and it's nice and beautiful and it gets a lot of shares and likes. And also we have some activities into Russia and some activities targeting Russian military, but I cannot speak about this a lot. I would just say that Russian soldiers and their families currently are very demoralized. We know it because obviously they don't have motivation to fight, but they're also very poorly equipped, very poorly trained. And now Russia announced mobilization, and we see that there are some very interesting processes started happening in Russia, which is good because we expect Russians to do their homework. We think, and it's like I think, and I've been saying this for years, that Russian civil society failed. It was their task to oppose, to protest, and to fight this very dangerous, and I would even say fascist, because we see what they're saying, we see how they call up openly, currently they call up openly for genocide. They're officials, they're propaganda people. So these people are basically enablers of genocide. They allowed their society, their domestic audience to bring death and destructions to Ukraine. They gave them a right, like moral right, to kill and rape and torture. So we've been warning, my colleagues and I, like the civil society organizations, there's so many, there's a whole network of these experts in Ukraine right now. And we've been warning our Western partners for years that pay attention what was going on in Russia. Because it's not just Putin. Putin is basically a reflection of what Russian people think. And this is the most dangerous part. And it also means that once we stop this war on the battlefield, we regain our territories, we repel Russian forces, it would not bring us to peace. And this is the crucial part which a lot of people do not understand, that peace for us is something different. And we see that Russians are trying to push this narrative currently on international, for international audience, saying that Russia is ready for peace, let's have peace talks right now. We are not ready for peace talks because we have to get control over our territories first. We have to get reparations. We have to punish those who have been killing us. So it's not like we can just stop it, like stop combat and that's it. Russia should be accountable for everything it has done. So I would like to show you what we are doing for our Ministry of Defense. I will show you two videos. So obviously we have to be very aware, and I think that Ukrainians are very much aware that we get a lot of support from different countries, and we are very grateful. And how we perform, how we show this gratitude to our partners, it influences the what support we will get. So we do a lot of videos. We call them videos to those who've been, supportive all these months. And I would like to show you the Swedish video. Here it is. No, I lost it. Just a moment, I think I'll close it. And yeah, it was our way to show how grateful we are, but also to troll Russians a little bit. And I would say that trolling is a very, very important part of our work. And here is another video. So in order to be successful in this, you have to understand the local context. You have to know music, you have to understand what triggers this audience. So we have in our team some foreigners, and they help us to basically shape this video in the right way. So thank you so much. I would like to answer all your questions now.
Thank you so much, Liubov. Fantastic, fascinating insight into the inner workings of Ukrainian strategic communications team. And yes, the floor is open. So I would like to ask you either to raise your hand, to use the raise hand function in Zoom, so that I could see you and also organize a proper queue, or else basically write your questions in chat and I will try to keep track of that too. So please. Yes, Nikolai, I see you.
Sorry, I just turned off my sound because we have quite much sound around. So I'll just activate. Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
Yes, thank you. It was a pleasure to listen to your presentation, Liubov. And I'm a biologist by background, working here at university as associate professor, but Ukrainian by my roots. So I am just following all the content which appears on TV and on internet. I'm just wondering how it's important to find a proper route to reach listeners and audience. I'm thinking that traditionally before TV was probably one of the main sources of information, but today content is more spreading through over the internet, YouTube, and different channels. So it's probably more difficult to focus on just one channel, and you have to be a very universal in your way you're presenting data. So what challenges is for spreading this correct information or the information content you're creating with your team is a first thing. And secondly, I would just would like to say that that you mentioned also that explaining that Putin is not the main cause of this trouble, but it's like it's not just about Putin. It's about ideology which formed the Russian population, or not Russian population of Russia. So it's also, I also saw this in my talking to people here and internationally, that quite many having this skewed understanding that it's all about Putin, and it's lots about how if Putin is sick or healthy, he is going to die, and this will solve the problem and war will be finished. So this is, I entirely support you that it's very important to show it's not just about Putin. But my question was about this different channels of spreading information. Thank you.
You're absolutely right. Back, 60 years ago, or 50 years ago, during the Cold War, it was much easier for Russian secret services to conduct so-called active measures, because you can just plant, some article, some idea. I remember this very popular story about how AIDS illness was created. Yeah, that was done in American labs. So the Russians just planted this in the Indian newspaper, and then a couple of years it was on the pages of New York Times. So it was easier. But now the world, as you have said, is very much fragmented. And you have to know which channels to use to target this precise audience. And that's what we do. We understand, and other players on this field understand where people who trust Russian propaganda, like older people, what they do, what they watch. We understand what they read. Like I would say that the main channels for spreading Russian propaganda right now here, not here, I'm in New York right now, but here, I always say here in Ukraine, are Telegram. And I know that in Sweden, for instance, people do not use Telegram, but in Ukraine, everybody reads Telegram, but also Viber. In 2014, Russia conducted all these campaigns through Facebook and Twitter, and obviously YouTube, which was like very, welcoming. It was like it's the algorithm of YouTube work in the way that you can inevitably come to Russian propaganda wherever you watch. So yeah, you have to understand your audience, and you have to tailor your content specifically for this audience. These videos I showed you, we cannot show it to Ukrainians, even if we translate them in Ukrainian language, or or, it just doesn't make sense. So we posted specifically for international Western audience. And if we are to do content for the global South, it should be totally different, like absolutely different. Because, and by the way, I was going to say where we and how we failed. I would say that we failed so far to explain the global South, what this war is about. And unfortunately, the reason is that we hadn't been working with these countries for years. We actually realized just recently that in some countries in Africa, we do not even have our embassies. So now we have to, take over, and we have to work with them very intense, because they are those who are very vulnerable because of Russian presence, physical presence through Wagner groups, for instance, in many African countries, like business companies, but also propaganda presence in Africa, and where they're actually spreading this narrative that NATO and the West are very hostile, and they're just basically fueling the conflicts and wars around the world. So now we have to counter all these things. And regarding not just Putin, and I would just also add that many people want to, especially in the West, even if they start like finally understanding that, okay, maybe Russians are really not so innocent, they still do not understand that there is no such thing like Russian culture separately from Russian regime. So basically it's just extension one of each other, like it's continuation. What we see, how they behave, how they act on the battlefield, that's what they got reading Dostoevsky. And I read everything, like totally everything what Dostoevsky wrote, and I even, diaries of his wife. So I know that these ideas, they are the reason why Russians behave this way, why they kill and torture, because Russians think, like majority, we cannot say all Russians obviously, but majority think that they have right for this dominance, that this is like they have right to bring order to either Ukraine or the West or other countries. So, and this is the core is not Putin. The core is like generally worldview and Russian culture, including of Russian society. And their reaction to mobilization is also the indication of this, what I'm saying, that they were not opposed, they were not protesting against the war, but now they are trying to escape the war, not so basically they don't want to do a dirty job. They're not against killing Ukrainians, raping Ukrainian kids and women. We are fine, but we just don't want to do it by ourselves.
Thank you, Lyubov. And I think we'll take a question from Joran and then a couple of questions from chat. So Joran, please.
Thank you, and thank you for this fascinating talk. I found it was tremendously interesting to listen to. And Nikolai asked about the platforms and the disseminations. I would like to ask a question about the production side, so to speak, being a media and communication studies scholar. So to what extent do you, I have seen that some PR agencies, for example, are involved in campaigning. I mean, the PR agency Banda and the Be Brave Like Ukraine campaign. So I would like to hear if you could say something more about which other players you are cooperating with when you are producing these films. I mean, they are obviously very smart and much about trolling, as you say. So please, if you could tell us something more.
Yes, we have a few production companies, and our government cooperate with them, and they create these high quality videos, you know, the beautiful clips. But in our work, like, we do not have our own production. We have like a cameraman, and this guy is the same guy who's actually doing montage, who is cutting the, you know, editing videos. So we, in our work, the main thing is an idea. So it shouldn't be, that is, as you see, it doesn't have a super quality production. Like, it's about the idea itself. And also why it is so successful, because of trust. And I remember it was like maybe March or April, and I got a number of requests from our military, and they asked us for some leaflets and posters and something like that. And I was like, what is it, like, criteria? How can you give me like your, you know, what do you want? Like, how should we do it? Like, do you have some specific things you want to? And they were like, no, just do it. We totally trust you. Just do it. So I think this was very encouraging for all of us. And I just, you know, pass it over to designers. We, at that moment, we had the team of the best Ukrainian designers, and they did it totally voluntarily, and nobody questioned, you know, what we were doing. Nobody's were saying, oh no, let's edit this here and edit this here. No, it was just, you know, there was a flow of information was so intense that they were ready to accept whatever and they totally trusted us. And another thing, since we realized, and many people in Ukraine, they didn't realize this thing in 2014, 2015, but in the morning of 21st of February, a lot of people suddenly realized that this is, you know, this is the matter of our survival. This is not something I can, you know, just, you know, turn my head from and just, you know, stay away for a while. No, like, everybody felt that they have to do something, and so many people came on board. You can't even imagine, like, everybody, like, from little kids, you know, to elderly people, you know, who were trying to knead something for our soldiers, to cook something. And the same was in communications. Like, everybody was like, I don't know how to use it, but I will learn. Like, just give me a task, I will do it. Like, give me 1-2 days, and I will figure out how to do it. And this was very inspiring. And also, talking about trust, it was our military, like, some of our services, who sent me like a list of telephone numbers of Russian soldiers' families, their relatives. And they said, like, can you talk to them? Can you call them and talk to them? And I was like, yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll do it. How do you want me to report you back? And they were like, no, just do it. Like, and what should I say? Just say, we know that you know what to say. Just do it. So I think this is what, yeah, this is something that really inspired all of us, that whatever we did, it was acceptable for everybody, because we understood that, yeah, we might make some mistakes, but we just have to be united and work together and be very active. We didn't have much time, you know, for, you know, amendments or, you know, yeah, well, it's also about relationship within the society. It's totally changed on 21st of February.
I see, thank you. Now is the time for the chat questions, and I received one question from one of our fantastic students in strategic communication program, Lydia Walter. Sweden just had an election, and the data after showed that men and women voted on very different parties. Did your team consider gender in your strategies in Ukraine under the election? I think, or maybe during the war, it's just probably the way it is meant.
we always consider gender. Like, I mean, when we produce something, when we communicate, we always understand that we have to include different, groups, not just gender groups. And I remember when we did this brochure, survival brochure, what to do in case of war or emergency, we had a very interesting picture there. So basically there were two men holding one kid. And this was my idea because I wanted to have it there. And I knew that there would be a scandal or something. I knew that people would question this. But surprisingly, for me and for my team, only these circles close to Russian agents at that moment, Medvedchuk and other, Russian, these Ukrainian oligarchs who turned to be Russian agents and who had media in Ukraine, media transmitting Russian, basically propaganda. So only these people and this media, they noticed this and ridiculed this. Most of the people, they were like, fine, but it was something not controversial, but something intentionally provocative, which we wanted to do, and to show that, yes, this is a government brochure and government, treats all, like LGBT community the same way. And we understand that they might be in the same situation, like in war situation or something. So we are trying to include this in our communications. I don't think that it's like very common in Ukraine, but now currently, because of the war, it's much easier to do, because a lot of, we have a lot of women in our armed forces, we have a lot of, LGBT people, and nobody, is like, if back, 5-7 years ago, we had some stories, and and they were obviously always highlighted by Russian propaganda, especially for our Western audiences. And then now, like, we do not really see within the Ukrainian society some some questions towards this. Like, I would say that it works in an opposite way. Like, Ukrainian government is trying to show that the communications are inclusive, and Ukrainian society is accepting this well.
Thank you very much indeed. The next question from Per-Erik Nilsson from Swedish Defense Research Agency. You mentioned that you had prepared since 2014, which was a wake-up call. I would like to ask how prepared you were in terms of A, interagency coordination, as well as B, coordination to deal with content from civil society. Was all this really foreseen, or did it fall into place organically?
I would say that this part, interagency cooperation, is the weakest part. We still have troubles with. Yeah, like, this is the, unfortunately, since 2014, we haven't managed to build strategic communication, like centralized, fully coordinated. So now we have to do it ad hoc. Now we have this cooperation and exchange of information, this coordination of efforts, just ad hoc, just because we understand that it's like the matter of, as I said, of our survival. But there is no clear system of communications. So we have this Center for Strategic Communication and Information Security, but we have other agency called Center for Counter and Disinformation. Also, all ministries have their own communication teams, and the structure is very much, chaotic, and I would say, okay, horizontal, but I would say chaotic also. Yeah, so and that's what we as civil society were pushing our government to for all these years. Like we have to have a clear body. We have to know who is subordinated to whom. We have to understand how this work holistically. Unfortunately, yeah. So it hasn't happened so far. But the way we managed to learn how to operate and coordinate ad hoc is like absolutely fascinating. So this experience obviously is very useful. And remind me the second part of the question: exchange, interagency.
Coordination to deal with content from civil society and interagency coordination. And was all this really foreseen, or did it fall into place organically?
Civil society part. This is, I would say, this thing that we can be the most proud of, because civil society in Ukraine is extremely strong and united. And I'm a part of civil society, and as a representative of my NGO, I know that, you know, we all exchange information, we support each other. Like it's not even, I wouldn't even say that it's some competitive, you know, environment. Yeah, it's this is like what we managed to achieve for the last 8 years. The first thing I would say, civil society. Yeah, was it foreseen? I would say that, yeah, by many people. Yeah, for many people it was obvious that it's boiling, and at some point is going to approach to, you know, this crucial, you know, point. It's going to explode. But we just, again, we just didn't expect that they would do it in this way, that they would attack civilians, that they would target, you know, innocent people. And yeah, we couldn't even imagine this. We couldn't imagine, and sometimes I wake up and I still cannot imagine that it is possible in the 21st century, you know, that they do not follow any rules of war. They just, you know, kill, you know, they target civilian infrastructure, hospitals, schools, theaters, cemeteries, you know. And yeah, so they turn to be so weak on the battlefield that they want to attack us and terrorize us, in, you know, in you know, our civilians, but not our military.
Yeah, Lyubov, I don't know your schedule. Can we, can you afford maybe 5 to 10 more minutes, because questions are flowing?
Sure.
Is it fine? Okay, thank you so much. It is very generous of you. So a question from another dear colleague, Valid Al-Sakaf. Do you use the Russian tgstat.com platform as a Telegram tracking service? And if so, do you think it is a reliable research tool to understand the dynamics of Telegram in Ukraine? Any useful Telegram-related research resources you could recommend?
There are many researchers on Telegram. I cannot recall it right now, but if you want, I can send it later. I would say that Telegram is a very nice tool for the Russians, but we managed, when the big war started, we managed to take the initiative in Ukraine. And it was such a absolutely fascinating, you know, thing that our security services, you know, and our media, knowing that Russian presence, Russian secret services presence on Telegram is absolutely, you know, unquestionable and significant. Knowing this, they managed somehow to launch so many different Telegram channels. So basically, they gained the initiative, and now I think that in Ukraine, our Telegram channels are much more popular among our population, which doesn't mean that we shouldn't fight Telegram, because it's absolutely not transparent mechanism. you cannot complain, like all these channels are anonymous, you cannot, there are no rules, no regulations. So I am not a fan of Telegram, and I wouldn't say that I would suggest to, you know, to have strategic communications there. But that's the conditions we found ourselves in. So we got lemons. We prepared the lemonade. So that's what we did.
All right, thank you. A question from another of our amazing students, Emmy Yaksgod. What was the primary focus of communication during the beginning of the war? Was it towards the outside world, towards the people of Ukraine, Russia, or are they all equally focused on?
It was all done simultaneously. As I said, we were getting so many requests. I have like connections, for instance, somebody was saying like, I have connections in France and I have connections there and I have media and so at some point, my colleagues and we understood that, okay, let's just divide all these people by topics. Like these people, they target only international audience, and this would work only for Ukrainian audience. They would, you know, create some content, some posters, videos, and then another people would spread it. This group, let's direct them on the Russians. So we focused our attention at the same time on all possible audiences except global South. Like, I mean, like, of course, Western, Ukrainian, and Russian. Western because we are dependable. We depend on the Western support so much, so it was crucial for us to work and to get weapons and sanctions, you know, and humanitarian aid. So yeah, I wouldn't say that we had some priorities. It should have been done at the same time because all these audiences were and are important.
Yet another question from our student, Alice Oblad, asks, how do you think the best way is to communicate and make your information stand out? And how can people see the difference between your information and the Russian propaganda when there is so much propaganda from Russia flowing through media?
This is a very good question. And that's why the work we've been doing all these years are so important, because we were studying Russian narratives, tools, you know, we were doing this, you know, the whole deconstruction of Russian propaganda machine. And we were teaching our audience how to recognize Russian propaganda. And now you obviously, so it's very easy to understand whether it comes from Russia or Ukraine, just because, you know, first of all, you know the narrative, you know the style even. Like you can immediately understand that if it is humane, you know, if it's about, you know, some actions on the battlefield, and you know it has right pro-Ukrainian messages, but also the way we convey this information in a very yeah, I would say, you know, very humane way. It's always Ukrainian. Russian propaganda, unfortunately is not very sophisticated. Like, and that's why they lost the information initiative in the first weeks of the full-scale invasion. They were just not ready for our response. They thought that if they would be applying the same techniques, you know, the same basically yeah, tactics that they had been using for all these years, then everything is going to be fine. But no, like Ukrainians were, you know, we started from 5 o'clock we heard in the morning, we heard the first explosions and shellings, and that was the moment when we started our communications. And in a couple, it took them, I think that it took like 3 or 4 even weeks, for Russians to get back on the same path, the same tempo, the same flow of their propaganda. They were absolutely shocked by how their forces were failing on the battlefield, how Ukrainians got united and started repelling them from the day one. And also they were shocked by the level and intensity of our communications.
Thank you. And now a very important question from my dear colleague and collaborator from Poland, Katarzyna Kopecka-Piech. From the perspective of a creator of strategic communications during wartime, what do you consider most important in the fight against disinformation on social media? And what do you think is the most effective solution?
Fighting disinformation?
Yes, on social media, and what would be the most effective solution?
I would say that it's about bringing your narrative faster. You should be very quick in what you're doing, and because as we all know, and all experts on disinformation, they keep saying it, that debunking is good. It's important to identify and disprove, disinformation. But you will never get the same outreach as those who spread these fakes, because even when you debunking it, you letting your audience know about these fakes. So it's important to push your narrative. But I would say also that it's easier to do when people feel this physical threat. It was much more difficult 7 years ago when I worked for the General Staff of Ukrainian Armed Forces. Believe me, so many people, they were just, not aware what was going on, and they didn't want to know just because they didn't feel physically. And now everybody is aware. We don't have like only this passionate part of our population who actually understand what's going on. No, like everybody, like, because they see pain, they see blood, they see victims, they see all by their own eyes. So it's and they start looking for information, and first thing they do, they follow Ukrainian state pages, right, accounts on social media. They don't read Russian propaganda. They want to read Ministry of Defense and presidential office and others. So the physical threat helps a lot to bring people this knowledge on this information.
Thank you so much. And now a question from our dear colleague here at Örebro University, Maria Elefson. You mentioned earlier trolling the Russians. There has been hype around North Atlantic Fella organizations, NAFO. What is your assessment of it? Has it had any effect, or is it more just hype?
I think it's a great initiative. And I just saw that, high European officials joining NAFO. So it's absolutely great, because this is a crucial dimension. If we want to have more support, either weapons or sanctions or whatever, we need to have people on our side. And if we can do it with humor, and if we can do it with memes and trolls, then obviously we have to use this opportunity. This is again, like, people will not, like, governments would, they will be giving us weapons more and more if the societies, if the voters are on our side. Nobody wants to give weapon knowing that, you know, people behind your back is actually against this act, against this step. So this is why it's very important for us to work not only with diplomats and governments and, you know, some opinion leaders, but with broader audience, and social media is a great tool for this.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Thank you so much. So I guess this was the last question. And I would like to thank everyone, but first and foremost, I would like to thank Liubov for finding time, for devoting your valuable time. I know you are very busy, and we really appreciate you coming here virtually to Örebro and telling us about the fascinating and amazing work you are doing. And we all wish you all the best. So have a great stay in New York, and yeah, safe travels.
Thank you so much. I'm very grateful for having this opportunity to speak to you. Sweden is one of my favorite countries, and I'm going to be there in a couple of months, and I always enjoy so much talking to the Swedes, because I feel that we always on the same page. We understand what Russia is. You know, you have your history with Russia. We have our history with Russia, and it obviously brings us closer. And yeah, I'm grateful for the support we have from you.
Yeah, thank you so very much once again, and thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye bye.
Have a nice day. Bye everyone.